Awesome.
Yeah, glad to finally write it up. It was just kind of gathering stuff that we've already talked about a bunch, but it was nice to present it all and also have like place to start for the actual parameters when we do the implementation.
Yeah, totally.
I
Cool.
told, sorry, Jeff. I told them to
No,
come
go ahead.
in. I told them to come in, so they will all of them will come in. Yeah. Oh well, yeah. That's it. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, it sounds great. Okay, let me share my screen here. Boring, are you able to start off the recording okay, or YGG, or I'm not sure who might have their finger over the trigger?
It's fine if Sean wants to do it. It's fine. I'll just do it. Which one way?
Yeah, I got mine going.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Let me just get my windows organized here. My computer's having some wicked internet issues today. Okay, let's see if a share screen will work. Okay, I think that should be working.
Yep.
Can I confirm? Perfect. Okay, cool. Awesome. So, yeah, I think agenda for this week, really exciting news. The initial honey issuance proposal is complete. It's posted up on the OneHive forum. So feel free to come here and check out the results of the first cadCAD model, and Luke will be able to go through and give us some more details. But for anyone who wasn't aware, the LunaSwarm is basically plugging all sorts of assumptions and parameters into cadCAD, which is simulation and validation tool, and coming out with sort of a computer-aided governance. How do we use data-driven decision-making in the honey ecosystem to create sustainable long-term incentives for the OneHive community? So maybe we'll just take a moment at the beginning if there are any other topics to add to the agenda. So obviously we'll have some time to go over the proposal. Whoops, there we go. And of course, towards the end of the call, perhaps we'll take a few minutes to discuss the next steps for LunaSwarm, next things that we are interested in modeling, another proposal for more funding from the OneHive community. And yeah, are there any other topics that we'd like to cover in this call? I'll leave the floor open to anybody to bring up any topics they're interested in.
Sounds like a good agenda to me.
Cool. All right, Luke, do you want me to just share screen and you can check through the proposal, or do you want to pull up the notebook and show anything in particular?
I am happy pulling up the notebook, or I can just share my screen and kind of go back and forth between the two. If people have any sort of questions, if they read the post, we can kind of dive into that. We can talk about the rationale. We can talk about next steps, because there's definitely like some things in the proposal that, or like in the model that like I reference in the proposal as being things that we could improve. Like right now, we just have a fixed outflow rate, but it would be really cool to take the work that was done to pull data from our live conviction voting instance. And so we just constantly are updating the outflow rate based on the actual observed outflow rate, like on a trailing average or something. And that will like allow us to kind of start plugging in real live data into our kind of model of the system. So we haven't done that yet for this like initial analysis, but we totally could. So there's stuff like that we could kind of go over. But I think the best place to start is if people who are new to the call or just interested, if anybody has any kind of questions or clarifications or anything regarding the proposal that they want to bring up, that would be a good place to start. Crickets.
I don't know. I'll ask a question, Luke. So, in the model, what did you model the outflow what's the percentage at? Isn't it 30 right now, or are we down to 10?
So the outflow parameter is at 0.5, I believe, like 0.05. And this is the max proportion of the common pool that can be spent each time step. So it relates to the like reserve ratio. We're at 0.3, or like 30% of the supply is in the common pool right now. And according to the model, we're spending like 5% of that per month. And when I set this parameter, I looked at the like spreadsheet that I think Monstrosity put together with all of our like outflows, and they're like averaged over time. And I just sort of eyeballed it to come up with like what looked kind of right there. The actual outflow rate varies over time depending on the proposals that we pass. So just having a fixed value here is a simplification of that. And in theory, we could like adjust the outflow rate if we changed the conviction voting parameters, or we just changed our behavior. Like if more people are abstaining, the outflow rate goes down. But for the model right now, it's just a fixed percentage of the common pool that leaves each time step.
I guess, thank you for that, but I guess I used the wrong term. What's our inflation at? Is it 30 or 10?
Right now,
what the outflow is. Go ahead.
Gotcha. Yeah, so right now our issuance rate is 30% per year that goes into the common pool, but we're spending significantly less than that. So like our actual like emission into the circulating supply is actually quite a bit lower, because we're actually only outflowing. We're outflowing at a rate that's lower than our issuance rate currently. So our common pool continues to grow.
Yeah, I got that. So basically, our common pool is growing at 25% per year, basically, which is kind of good. It gives us a lot of honey to do stuff with. So, okay, interesting. Thank you.
So from my understanding, there will be no burning for the honey. We will just adjust the issuance of honey to meet the target.
Yeah, so there is a burning mechanism, but when we were talking about this at the beginning of January, before we kind of did this, we were kind of expecting to use a target reserve closer to like 20%, just because it seemed like a nice round number. If we did that and we implemented it, right now we've got 30% reserves in the common pool. If we implemented a target rate of 2%, it would immediately start burning honey gradually from the common pool, reducing the total supply until it reaches that 20%. Based on kind of the like modeling and analysis, setting the target reserve closer to like 3% or 30%, which is effectively where we're at, which also has the nice property that we don't actually change the status quo too much when we implement the policy. We wouldn't necessarily burn, but we would also effectively have a 0% issuance rate while we kind of maintain that balance. Yeah, so they're still burning in the mechanism, but we wouldn't necessarily, with the proposed parameters, immediately start burning honey from the common pool.
Any thought of using that extra honey for other things? So we kind of have this kind of honey that we want to get rid of, or we kind of want to reduce the issuance of honey so we can reach the target. Why we don't just take the extra honey that we have and we just use it, for example, for any kind of marketing idea that could bring more value to OneHive itself, rather than just getting rid of it.
Well, just to be clear, if you had a proposal to spend it, then you would have spent it, and then it wouldn't be there, and it wouldn't get burned. So it's sort of circular, and in a good way. But in a sense, this is and you have a model that has a target. It's sort of only really acts after the human decision-making layer. So if you believed that, or if you were watching this system happening and projecting it and seeing accumulation that would largely trigger a burning, then it would be on the community to come up with a policy, or excuse me, not a policy, but a proposal that they would then pass and they expend the funds, thus not triggering the burning. So it's really a line of, sort of a last line of recourse to avoid degeneracy. Sorry, my daughter's hanging out with me today. And so I think the argument I'm trying to make, boring, is that it already has that. The system works that way. You would only ever retrieve burning if we had failed to find things that we collectively agreed to spend on.
I see. So it's kind of like it's already happening. So we don't need to do anything. Like if we moved in that way, we don't need to do any kind of actual burning because we already moving in the model that we planning to do.
Right. I'm basically saying if we foresaw the future of burning due to accumulation towards this threshold, it would be incumbent upon us as a community to vote to pass the proposals that we wanted to spend money on, and thus not have too much money, and thus not have to burn.
Okay, gotcha.
I guess the other thing that's really interesting in the model is this idea of productivity. And the productivity is just sort of a like parameter that I have in the model is like a global parameter. But it's sort of the average productivity across all the proposals. And you might have proposals that are more valuable or more productive than others. And you might have a situation where because of where the market's at or because of other things, there just aren't a lot of very productive proposals that we're in a position to do. And so you start to accumulate funds into the common pool. And after a certain point, after that threshold, it starts to burn the tokens so that we don't end up in a situation where we have a extremely large common pool that like results in like significant changes in behavior around like what gets funded or what gets passed. It like stabilizes at some value.
Can I change the subject?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to applaud one thing and make a question about another. First off, I love how you make a cultural suggestion around keeping the issuance rate maximum, like so the throttle base the same, and that it won't be changed probably unless it's an issue, but while having the other ratio still be subject to governance and optimization in the future. I love it. I love the acknowledgement of cultural expectations. And also, do you have a link to the DAO that is the test DAO that's been deployed with this issuance rate and Celeste?
I do not have a link, but if any of the Celeste team is on the call, they may have a link. They should have a testnet org for us all to like bang on and like actually like go through the workflows very soon. But they definitely have a link to the DAO that they're using now. It's just don't know if the front end is hooked up to a point where you can like bang on it. But yeah, you'd have to ask in the Celeste channel.
Thanks, Luke.
So Luke, am I right in looking at this? It seems like it's kind of, I don't know if rewarding's the right word, but it seems to kind of skew towards actually passing proposals and spending honey, right? Like if we have this honey building up, then it should be spent on something or else it's going to get burned anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would say that it's skewed per se in the sense that like conviction voting is very much like you don't need everybody to come to agreement to spend things. You just need enough support. And
Right.
having like a target reserve ratio means that there's always going to be funds, and it's going to try and either issue funds or like encourage people to have inflows come in, because that's how the tokens would end up getting burnt and they'd like realize value appreciation, to like maintain a balance in the common pool that is relatively stable over time in terms of a proportion of the supply, and encourage like relatively like consistent and stable behavior in terms of like outflows as a proportion of the supply.
I would argue that it does provide a little bit of a bias towards action in a mostly normative way, in the sense that, like, instead of creating an environment where it might be easy to establish, let's just say, a perception that, hey, we have so much money. You see this in crypto a lot. Like, look at how much money this organization has. This system sort of biases away from that way of thinking in favor of action or work. It doesn't necessarily mean that spending is better for no reason at all, to the point about efficiency and some of the productivity questions that are in these models. And those are model concepts, but they still represent this idea that value in one hive is created by doing things, not say accumulating honey in a pot.
Yeah, because like we can't just save it forever and watch the pot grow forever, because it's going to start getting burned anyway. Is that's kind of how that's going to go, right? I mean, like at some point it either needs to be used or it's going to get burned.
Right, but I think the continuous nature of the system over time basically says that if we're just sort of more or less on average spending it as fast as it's being created, then this will be in sort of a semi-stable equilibrium. Like, it might be bouncing up and down, but we'll never hit the burn rate because we'll be spending, even if sometimes there's a short break where we didn't see anything we liked, but then maybe there's a spike of really cool projects and we can cover them. And like in its sort of, just say like normal operating procedure, we'd never expect to see a burn. But at the same time, it's possible. And so that kind of creates at least a psychological boundary against the idea of, well, let's just save up all the honey.
Right. Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. Appreciate the explanation. And the baby sounds.
Luke, one thing in this model I noticed is you don't take into account the price of honey at all, right? It's just honey issuance straight up. It doesn't take into account kind of the dollar value of honey against whatever we might spend it on, kind of thing.
Actually, we do have this notion of price because it was really important to understand inflows. And the way that we modeled price is we have a pricing like fundamental heuristic based on the current level of like market saturation, and the like assumed like market size and the circulating supply. So as there's like a smaller circulating supply, you've got like a valuation metric, kind of based on the amount of inflows relative to the circulating supply. And then we've got like a pricing function that gives us a spot price that is actually a stochastic process that looks like a random walk from a starting price, and it has some variance and like a pull towards the price target over time. And that's why if we look at, if we look at this like market cap metric, we see it kind of performing differently under the different simulations, but we also don't see it as this like super smooth flat line because our like pricing heuristic is a bit of a random walk. Yeah, so the pricing function like is probably not perfect. It's definitely a like simplification of the dynamics, but it's intended to be like better than not having it at all.
Yeah, I understand that. I guess let me put this in a different way. That, you know, we're kind of looking at how much we're going to inflate, and we look at outflows, right? And you kind of modeled outflows as a percentage in honey. But really, you want to look at this, I mean, you're paying for stuff, in some loose sense, you're paying for it in dye, for lack of a better, right? And so, you know, if honey multiplies by a factor of 5, then we don't need to issue as much, and we don't end up spending as much if the amount that we're paying for like is constant in terms of, you know, dollars per month. I'm not talking about new projects. I'm talking about just operations and supporting people long term, right? Whereas if the price of honey drops by 80%, you know, factor of 5 down, then we have to issue more honey just to keep everybody on the dole, right? And keep things operating. And so I'm just kind of thinking in my head, it seems like we have a lot of buffer particularly if the price goes to the upside, but do we have enough if it goes back down to 200 again to continue with normal operations and all that jazz?
So if I don't mind me adding a couple of thoughts, one is that the original conviction voting model was paired that I wrote was paired with a die reserve for similar reasons to what you're arguing. I think the one hive system was implemented differently for reasons that Luke can articulate. It was a reference design, so I don't think of it as a deviation per se, but like your thinking was my original thinking. And I'll also add that to some extent, again, depends on what we would do. You can mitigate this pretty significantly by having the DAO itself hold honey swap XDAI honey tokens, because that LP token stake is essentially auto rebalancing pool of honey and dye.
Yeah, you're going right to where I was going, which is if we take, this is why I wanted to have a reserve that kind of was disconnected from this whole process, but Luke was kind of against, was that then you kind of have an emergency buffer in case things get a bit wacky that will move in the direction you kind of would like it to, and you can actually earn return, right? I mean, I've been tracking the honey XDAI pair, that thing's earning almost 20%. I mean, we could take like a third of our common pool and stick it in there, and it would cut our cost. We'd
experience a pretty big slippage,
right?
On the implementation of that policy, you'd experience a pretty big slippage because you'd essentially be doing an asymmetric liquidity add. It means you'd have to basically sell honey for dye to get a symmetric quantity to do the add. But that notwithstanding, one thing I think is important to note here is that this whole paradigm was set up for this sort of iteratability. So I don't think it's an argument against the plan as Luke's put it together. I think if anything, it's the natural evolution of the research around how how One Hive manages its financial assets, both supply and holdings. So I would recommend just effectively having a future project to explore what these various strategies that you're describing would look like for One Hive, but not necessarily treat it as a blocker towards sort of the experiment.
Well, we did have a bit of discussion on this sort of off to the side, but the ways that you deal with the slippage is you DCA this over time. You don't do like 1,000 or 2,000 honey at once. You do a honey a day, or like what we were suggesting was just taking the honey swap returns, and instead of like burning honey, you just walk those in over time into this pair, and basically instead of sticking it into the common pool, you kind of just build that treasury up over time, right? And so that's one way to mitigate the first point that you had. But I agree, it's something I think we should explore that I think has a lot of positive potential, and it's a good use of the common pool, right? That we don't have to just suck it back and burn it and then somehow catch ourselves in a trap later without funds to do stuff that we need. And then the reverse issue is the real issue is like, let's say we need $1 million. Do we just go and like totally zap it out of the LP pool instantly? There's an issue of liquidity, right? When you do stuff like this.
So there's just another set of questions around that, but I think it's compositional. So like if you say that we wanted to pass a policy to put a bunch of liquidity into, let's say I made a proposal tomorrow to take $1 million worth of honey and put it into honey swap, and that passed. Just actually I probably can't because it probably violates the minimum at one proposal, but some large number, and actually enough people backed it to support it. That's another version of what I said at the beginning, where now that it's not in the common pool, it's essentially not part of what's being counted for this threshold. So, an emergency, and whether we thought this was right or not would come down to the community. An emergency way of avoiding burning would be to say, hey, let's pass a proposal to take some percentage of our holdings and put it into liquidity, because then at least we're putting it to work, we're reducing slippage in the pair, etc. So there's, real value created by putting capital in liquidity pools because it adds inertia, etc. Now, if we were to really look at how impactful something like the DAO adding or removing liquidity is, we might actually want to have a whole policy around what it means for the DAO to add or remove liquidity and have its own set of rules that said, look, like one hive can add and remove liquidity in honey XDAI, according to the following rules, and we can remove it according to the following rules, and we might have to vote that whole contract into place in order for this to be kind of safe in a sense. But I do think it's a reasonable way to approach slowly expanding the one hive financial contract ecosystem.
I just want to interject because there's a piece there that I think is really important insight, which is kind of how we've designed things with swarms as well, where we have a bunch of flexibility in terms of policy choice that we can push to the edges while keeping like the core like issuance and distribution protocol as simple as possible. And this is one of the things I like about using Honey as opposed to like an external reserve asset that has other dependencies, is you could have this like treasury management gadget that's like more or less automated that kicks in when you fund it and starts kicking back if it sees that the common pool in terms of USD value or just in terms of like balance itself dips too low. And then you get your like kind of treasury management kind of component and the ability to sort of dampen volatility swings for the community and treasury management without necessarily having any one of these like policies encoded directly at the like core of the protocol. If that makes sense, Rogue.
Yeah, I think we all kind of agree at approach, and it's just conceptually, do we really want to burn everything or do we want to have a reserve? I'm always the advocate for a reserve for lots of different reasons, mostly emergencies I come from Maker, and they back everything with their token. If we do anything with Honey and Agave, I would have similar issues, but there's other stuff there. So I think generally we're agreed and we can pursue these things. I guess my question was where do you think you want issuance to land here, Luke?
So what I proposed in the doc here was a throttle of 10% per year as like the upper bound in terms of supply adjustments. When I looked at like those different parameters together in the simulation, it looked like the throttle after a certain point doesn't really give you that much. It just makes things more volatile. And I think from like the perspective of like new community members or people that aren't necessarily as deep in the weeds or just don't trust it because it's very complicated, being able to say, we expect issuance to always fluctuate and be dynamic based on this process, but it'll never really exceed 10% a year, feels like it would make a lot of people a lot more like, they trust the mechanism a lot more if they have that like simple kind of guarantee. I think that in terms of like the actual like rate, that's pretty on par with what we're actually seeing in terms of entering circulating supply. So I don't think it's a like dramatic shift, but it does like kind of encode that. And it is a pretty big jump from the 30% issuance into the common pool that we have currently.
Yeah, that makes sense. What happens if we switch to this? Do we start burning our 30% off, basically? Like, what do we end up with if we implement kind of what's being proposed as is in terms of where will we burn down to? Unless we spend or do something else. If we just go along the normal track, don't do any major proposals to do a treasury or whatever, where does it look like our treasury would end up in 6 months to a year?
So
our common pool, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the balance, it's going to target 30%, which is roughly where we are now. If we spend very, very rapidly, like if we accelerate our spending from like what we're spending now, we might be at a point that's like lower than 30% now. the further we get from 30%, the like more aggressive the like issuance will be to try and get you there, but it's never going to exceed that 10% per year. And so like we should, in theory, if this is working, start to hover around that like 0.3 like reserve ratio. Like that's the intention, is for like over any time horizon, we'll probably end up stabilizing at about that amount. And then if we increase the value of honey, then that increases the dollar value of that amount as well.
Got it. I like this. I'll have to review the document because I'm on my phone. This is all tiny for me, but everything sounds good. I think you're right that unless we really up our spending, and even if we do, unless the operational side of it grows dramatically, we're going to sit at that 30% mark and just burn unless we spend. And then we have that 30% to lay back on, and it sounds like our run rate is estimated to be in the 5% range. So it's literally going to be half of what the issuance target is, with a 30% backing, which is about 6 times what our spend is and 3 times what our issuance is. And that's good. I'm okay with all of this. It sounds great.
We're on track to be better than most governments at managing our relative, I'm just like,
I mean, and the 10% issuance is like awesome. You know what I'm saying? Like every other project, I don't know, they launched and issued massively, and then it's unclear what they did after that. They had a huge treasury fund that they just started chewing into. Whereas here, like, we kind of have a treasury fund, but inherently I like it all better in the end, and we'll just have to watch it relative to what the honey price is doing, because I think we're just going to go up. So in the end, that all works to our benefit. So I think
in a
this
way
all
we're
looks great.
we're tying our capacity to mint on our capacity to produce. So in a sense, we have to spend money, and we can't waste it. Otherwise, people will I wouldn't expect people to stick around because it wouldn't be cool. Like, the output has to be valuable, at least socially. But the idea is that if we're spending money on things that seem productive, at least to us and ideally to others, then we create new capacity to keep minting without accumulating and burning. So we're like incentivizing an equilibrium between sort of, production and spending and the creation of the asset, rather than front loading or like backload shocking it.
The other interesting thing here, and this isn't really represented in the model, but there's effectively 2 ways for us to create value for honey. I guess there's more than this, but like there's 2 mechanisms that I think you could categorize things into, which is, one, we repurchase honey through fees. So like HoneySwap has the honeymaker contract, and it buys honey and it puts it into the common pool as like an inflow. But we also have things like Celeste, where people will stake honey in order to participate in a protocol and earn fees. And that creates, that doesn't necessarily create a direct inflow, but it does increase reduce the circulating supply effectively, because people have locked it up to stake and earn a yield. And so if we produce things that create these like demand sinks or places for people to like use and lock up honey, that increases the price, and it will also decrease the nominal value of inflows, assuming fees stay the same. So we might find in a situation where we're inflating the supply, but the price of honey is still going way up, because the demand for honey is just increasing. And both of those are healthy for the system. And the fact that we do have issuance and we don't have like a fixed supply policy means that like we can pursue those things that increase the demand or create a sink for honey, while ensuring that we actually have like a sustainable like revenue stream from that effect, right? Because if we had like a fixed supply policy, people lock up a bunch of honey individually, it doesn't allow the DAO to like benefit from that behavior and continue to build and improve and maintain and spend things. Cool. Well, if there aren't any other kind of questions on this, it might be a good time to sort of switch gears into the other topics on the agenda in terms of like other like next steps for Luna, organizing kind of the proposal and stuff like that. But if anybody in here is looking at this proposal, looking at the cadCAD model and has questions, feel free to ask in the Luna channel. Join the call next week for that. Or just like, ping me or somebody else. And I think we can keep the discussion going. We'll have a few weeks before, like, I think implementation wise, unless there's like major controversy, it kind of makes sense to roll this out as part of the major like upgrade to the DAO with Celeste and disputable conviction voting and all of that. That way we're like reviewing all of the like changes for the proposal like one time, everybody has their eyes on it, and we're not doing this as like a series of things, because I don't like touching core contracts as much as possible. But that'll give us like a little bit of time for people to analyze the model, ask questions, get really comfortable, feel like they have a good understanding.
Yeah, I just want to say good job, Luke and Luna team. It looks great. So I'll review the actual documentation, but I just want to say good job. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. High fives all around, but Luke was definitely the one who carried this across the finish line. So yeah, really fantastic to see the first results of the Luna Swarm cadCAD model. And yeah, I think maybe I can share my screen with the agenda here. And yeah, I guess for the next 20 minutes, we have some slots to discuss the next focus for Luna Swarm. So I saw it discussed in the Luna channel about risk parameters for Agave. Are there any other thoughts? And I mean, I'm happy to just track all of these at this point, and we can maybe discuss in our next week call, or unless there is a clear direction for what the next priority should be, happy to drag a couple of top contenders and have a discussion about what should be next for the Luna Swarm.
I also had request. I don't know. I mean, I told you this earlier, and if the other rest of the people here are interested, I think even just like 5 minutes, even if it's the last 5 minutes, where you could give us an update on some of the research that you and I and others have done about the role of research in DAOs. I know you have it here on the agenda, but I just kind of want to comment to everyone that one thing that's really important, I think, is to realize how unsure of what we were going to find and do we were when we started the project, and that Luke really just like did this awesome work and we're all reviewing it. But this is sort of an inherent challenge to doing R&D in any setting, much less in a DAO setting. And so we want to I don't know, I would like to have at least a few minutes for Jeff to talk about some of the work that he's done to better understand what this looks like across DAOs, and the experiences that we've had in trying to facilitate sort of R&D as a core competency in these community organizations. That's my request for a topic.
I think we can definitely cover that. We may want to cover that next, and then at the end do the like next step and priorities, because that's, I think, a topic that we can always do in the text channel asynchronously in terms of like figuring out the next steps and projects. Whereas that conversation about research is something that I feel like is probably best done over voice anyway. So maybe we can do that first.
Sounds good. Just pulling up a couple of diagrams here. Sorry for the delay.
Yeah, while he pulls it up, I'll just kind of bring the caveat that Jeff, myself, and others from the BlockScience team have been really making an effort to, let's just say, decentralize R&D, especially R&D involving cadCAD and models and policymaking. And that effort has manifested as participation in DAOs, and we also do quite a bit of client work with BlockScience, but as personally as participation in DAOs and like trying to enable or support that kind of R&D. And we've learned in this process that it can be kind of tricky in the same way that it's tricky in a conventional organization to defend research and to give a good case for why it's valuable when it costs money and time and effort that could genuinely be spent elsewhere, and when it's often uncertain what you're going to get for it. So I think Jeff is going to give us a overview of the learnings.
Yeah. So, so as Michael Zarga mentioned, we're doing some other research collaborations. One of them being for Prime DAO. We are looking into kind of DAO2DAO interactions and some of the primitives and tools that can facilitate these kinds of interactions, and of course, discovering all sorts of interesting things on the way. So this is one of the diagrams that we put together throughout this D2D research process, and basically talking about the kind of overlapping, interleaving research and development divisions. So you kind of have this, this sort of emergent research zone where basic research increases your understanding and improves your strategy, which can then inform your applied research, which can then inform your development, which can then inform your day-to-day operations. And all the way we're improving our strategy, our tactics, and our tools. But there's kind of this bifurcation of modality in searching or in working in these types of divisions, because there's a lot of unknowns in the research. A lot of it is explore and exploit. We don't quite know what we're going to get to. We're exploring in the research area. Then in the product area, we kind of take what the cream, what rises to the top in that research phase, and then we focus in on developing. So we're exploiting, a particular outcome, and we want to build more tools to improve our day-to-day operations. So this diagram, I think most of all, is just to explain the sort of overlapping capabilities of research and development in tandem. So a lot of the...
Sorry to interrupt, Jeff.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just me, but I'm not able to see your screen. It's just loading for me.
Let me try that again.
You might just have to downgrade the settings. I was also having trouble seeing it.
Yeah, same with me.
I could see
There we go.
that whole time.
Better now?
Yeah, I can see it now.
Yep.
Cool. Yep. Great. So yeah, sorry, I'll just give a quick run through again. So we've got kind of research on the bottom, product on the top. So this is how research informs development and vice versa. So we have, basic research improving our strategy, applied research improving our tactics, development improving our tools, which all feed into our day-to-day operations, which is ultimately, the end goal is the users and the people who are using and benefiting off these systems. So of course we have the slower research cycles, faster development cycles, and kind of a range in between here. So this is just talking about how both research and development are necessary, and just trying to also increase the understanding in a development-heavy Web3 space that there is the need for this kind of exploratory research that feeds into specific development initiatives that can then move forward. Any questions on this? I just wanted to bring this up as a quick artifact that came up in some of our other research, just so we can be clear and on the same page between researchers and developers that both are necessary, they both inform each other, and then, yeah, happy to move on if there are no more questions about this.
Excuse me, Jeff? Is
Yeah.
this similar to something that would be pros for automated machine learning? Like, is this kind of the same principle that would be followed if you were actually building something for the model itself to fucking follow? Excuse me.
Yeah, I would argue that this is probably true. I might abstract it a little bit more than that, but I view most of good automated machine learning and automated technologies themselves are effectively epistemological processes programmed, and this is the description of an epistemological process. Which so maybe I use the word epistemology is like how we know things and like what it means to know things. So like when we use code and data and machines, sorry.
You're so awesome. Dude, you're so awesome. I was just going to be like, whoa, bro, whoa. Wait a minute. I get what I'm looking at for machine learning, but wait a minute. You just dropped a dime on somebody. So I know like you did it though. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Cool. One of the other tools that we've started chatting about, and this kind of ties into the Luna Swarm and how we, or how contractors work with DAOs. So I use, myself as an example. I work with OneHive, I work with Prime DAO, I work with a number of other DAOs. And one of my early observations was the overhead of interacting with multiple DAOs quickly adds up, because you don't really have the economies of scale in a traditional firm where, HR takes care of all the admin. You just get your paycheck, you do your work, you get your paycheck. It's quite easy. Working within multiple DAOs, you have to submit multiple proposals. And especially in this research modality, a lot of the proposals require you to list out your deliverables. What are you expecting to find? When you move further down the stack, it's more and more difficult to define what you expect to find, because a lot at the basic research level, you're more or less on an exploration path. And then, of course, when you find something interesting, then you move it up to applied. It moves into development, and you can move into the exploit part of that. But at the basic level, there's a lot of explore. So as a contractor, having to apply continuously to multiple DAOs on fairly short work cycles, depending on the DAO, it ended up being a lot of overhead work for a contractor to work for multiple DAOs. So we started looking at this these DAO payment primitives and said, well, what if instead of humans collaborating in a DAO, it's DAOs collaborating to support their resources, the resources that are providing value, especially across multiple DAOs or neighborhoods of DAOs. So this is just a payment primitive that kind of turns it on its head a little bit. So
I lost the video stream. I don't know if anybody else is having issues. It might just be a Discord issue, and it could be me, but I maybe reload it in case other people are missing the visuals.
Thank you. Let me see if this board will work better. Does it work better when I don't share my screen and I just share this window?
Yes.
Can you see that now?
Decidedly,
okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so on the left-hand side here we have, and I mean, this is just a system diagram, stock and flow diagram. Some of you may have seen some of these before. To simplify, on the left, this is basically just a contractor opt-in and out. So you could have some kind of basically trusted contractor list. They could join that whitelist of, OneHive contributors or Luna contributors, for example. Their ID goes into a whitelisted list, which can then be allocated funds. They can leave that at any time. If they leave within the, appropriate structure, aka after the job has been done, they can claim their stake back. If they leave mid-job, their stake is slashed and goes into this funds pool. So this is basically just a sort of coin-operated research team, we've started calling it, where the DAO can continuously top up funds, or any DAO can top up funds. So for example, if OneHive found this research useful, and also the Common Stack found this research useful, then both of those groups could put funds in, and those funds can be allocated to the whitelisted set of contractor IDs according to whatever allocation policy was appropriate. So that may pay out 10% of these funds per month, or $1,000 per list per member each month, or whatever they decided. And it's not all that different from requesting or putting in a proposal and getting paid. It just changes the onus from the contractor having to apply on a contract by contract basis, and then claim all those funds from all those DAOs, and turn this more into a top up the funds. As long as there are funds in that pool, then these workers will continue working and receive those payments in a periodic fund allocation.
The 2 points I want to make, though, is that one, this is a DAO-to-DAO pattern, meaning that this particular research, which we worked on, was related to how DAOs could coordinate to support people that they found valuable. So it's sort of in reverse. But in a setting like OneHive, actually, some of these things are a little less onerous, because with conviction voting, the burden, the administrative burdens for passing things are a little bit lower. In a lot of DAOs, they're very high. And so, like in this case, it might be comparatively easy for a small group of us to make a proposal to put a small amount of funds into this object, into this contract, to support researchers that we felt were providing, or developers, or any other role that we felt were providing value that OneHive was consuming, even once removed. But also, this structure is designed to enable again, a clean interface where another entity with a completely different procedure for deciding to co-fund that work would be able to come through the same portal, but they would be using their own process to determine that they wanted to support that work. So it's kind of like an adapter pattern of sorts that allows certain types of work that raise all boats to be better supported by all boats, or at least insofar as those boats opt through their own procedures to support said work. So anyway, that's my comment, is having worked on this a little bit, it fits kind of a rung down. It would be as if the interesting research in question was living beyond the scope of an org. In this case, Luna is pretty contained to OneHive's use cases. If anything, I imagine external parties seeing the value of things like the work that Luke did and it getting published in an open source setting and the contracts as actually potentially leading to other organizations putting money to support this particular group's R&D if they find these valuable and they want to fork not just the code, but the models.
Right. Cool. So yeah, just wanted to share some of the work and research that's going on in other research groups, and of course, if there's anything useful, we're designing these to be as generalized and wide-ranging as possible. So yeah, very interested in any feedback if anyone has any thoughts, or otherwise happy to post the occasional update in the Luna channel as far as how that research continues to progress.
The main thing, actually, Jeff, I think it goes beyond that. I would love feedback, because I think one challenge we're seeing here is that to our earlier discussion, it's actually pretty hard to get a DAO to fund R&D. And even in this group, I think it was very tentative. We're like, what's going to go in the proposal? What are the deliverables? And although they came out to be really valuable, the fact is we couldn't write them down in advance very clearly. And this mechanism is actually designed for the kind of role reversal on a proposal where effectively its reputation that's at stake, or even stake potentially that's at stake, in the sense that people are known to be capable of producing, but if they're going to produce in a experimental or a research domain, more often than not, it kind of defeats the purpose to be able to write down exactly what you're going to do before you do it. And so you need a sort of logical inverter. You need like a machine for saying, hey, like we are, empowering these people to do the research that they believe is valuable. And insofar as it continues to be valuable, we may continue to do that. But it's backwards of a more traditional proposal architecture. And although it's not necessarily the case that it's a good fit for everything, there may be things other than research for which it's a good fit.
I wanted to kind of take a step back there, because I don't think it's specific to research. And I don't think it's necessarily a super complicated technical thing. Like, I think we kind of already do this to a certain degree with swarms. Having different structures. And I think it's more of a cultural challenge for us, at least, to start to establish expectations and processes for proposals that maybe aren't as well specified, but give the people that are proposing them a little bit more latitude and a little bit less friction in terms of being able to execute. And I think this is relevant to the Buzz Swarm doing marketing. I think it's relevant to the new support team swarm that's kind of managing support work, where we know the people involved are relatively reliable. We know that they're acting in good faith, but it's going to take them a bunch of bandwidth and time and energy writing up a very specific proposal. And then a week from then, you might be like, well, that's all outdated because there's new information. So then you get in this weird back and forth in terms of proposals needing to be really well specified to be transparent, versus just delegating the responsibility to people or systems that you trust. And I think we need to maybe do more and do a better job of kind of reducing the friction for some of these kind of ongoing efforts, whether they're marketing, whether they're research, whether they're support. And that doesn't mean we don't also have proposals for very scoped works for specific projects or bootstrapping concepts, but for these ongoing operational duties that really there's a lot of people in the OneHive community doing them now and not necessarily getting getting paid for them, because it's much harder to track, or like tracking it becomes so much of an administrative burden. It's not even worth it.
This is something I really want to echo. I think part of the reason that this came to be, this particular little research branch, is not necessarily just research. And research is the case that, Jeff and I have talked about because we're researchers. But the truth is, this is an observed phenomena that was included even in early discussions in the source grid community about what is support labor, what are things that don't necessarily produce obvious artifacts, and how do you value those things in terms of, in the source grid context, like, what do you do to produce a record of the doing and the appreciation and the webbing? But beyond that, in this environment, we're talking about, needing to be able to compensate people who provide support labor and not necessarily putting an undue burden on them from an administrative perspective in order to try to force some artificial parity with a different class of labor. And so here we're really talking about machinery for directly boxing support labor of many kinds, or any indivisible labor that the community decides to fund, rather than funding it through a proposal that's defined based on a deliverables-based template. It's funding proposals that are based on a support structure for support style work, for work that is ongoing and in many ways implicit. And some of the conversations that Jeff and I have had have been that research often has some aspect of this, although it has sometimes some big spiky deliverables where it's like, wow, that cool thing came out. Actually, a lot of the time is just spent grinding and sometimes talking to people, making diagrams, documents, equations, messing with the same code over and over again until it looks right. Like, it's really hard to explain the deliverables. And then once you extrapolate that to really even more invisible work, community management is one of the ones that I think just gets underappreciated left and right. It's so important to kind of keep an organization functioning and healthy. So anyway, so we kind of present this to you guys as an area of research that's ongoing. It is at least partially funded elsewhere, so it's not like we're coming and saying, hey, fund us to do it. But we actually thought that this particular community would, A, have thoughts and possibly be able to make use of, even potentially be interested in the application of this inverter for communities doing what I'd call ongoing support work, as opposed to the primary production work that we normally associate with, bulleted deliverables.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely, yeah, I completely agree. And on the marketing side, support side, community management, sometimes, talking about the work is a lot of work. Scoping the work is one job, and then doing the work is another job entirely. So there's definitely some room for these kinds of, I don't know, I explained it the other day as a DAO extension. It's just like a payment extension that can facilitate multi-DAO funding initiatives for research groups that benefit more than one group, or any marketing development inter-DAO operations. I think there's definite room for these kinds of new tools. So excited to explore them. If there's any other questions or thoughts, feel free to drop them in the Luna channel. Happy to discuss more there. But otherwise, we are at the top of the hour, so we've got our next call for next week, and happy to pick up the discussion around what's next to model and any other questions that come up at that time. Any final comments, Luke, Z, or anybody else? Final Q&A?
Amazing work, everyone. I just want to say that. It's really cool stuff.
Yeah, I know we're top of the hour. I went ahead and dropped in the Luna channel 3 sort of items that are top of mind for me as sort of like potential priorities or projects that Luna might look into. But I think we can continue that discussion asynchronously.
Awesome. I've got those noted in the notes so we can pick up that conversation next week. Thanks so much, everybody. Great call. High fives, Luke. Thanks so much for all the work. We'll see you all next week.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
guys.
Bye bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.